So here's our agenda for Virtual Class 9. We're going to start today with activity 16.1, which is a listening. You'll listen to an audio artificial intelligence and answer activities 2 and 3 on page 86. 16.2 is language key, which looks at passive voice. So if anything is a bit vague after today's presentation, you can find all the important information you need in the language key on page 87. You will be answering activities 5 and 6. Activity 16.3 is a worksheet on passive voice. We're going to check that a little later with more detailed instructions at the end of the presentation. But you're going to be using passive voice to talk about your favorite book, movie, and piece of artwork. Finally, the last activity of the week, 16.4, is a MyOn activity about humanoid robots running into the future. Read the book, take the quiz, get 60% or more, and you've completed the activity. Our end in mind is to recall passive voice in the present and past with or without focus on agent. We checked passive voice when you were in second grade. Do you remember when it is used? The passive voice is used to show interest in the person or object that experiences an action rather than the person or object that performs it. So we're looking at the person or object that receives the action from someone or something else. In other words, the most important thing or person becomes the subject of the sentence. Most common passive phrase, what do you think it is? We use this passive sentence without even thinking about it. It's to be born. When were you born? The question. I was born in 1985. Where were you born? I was born in the United Kingdom. Thousands of babies are born in this hospital every year. When we are born, we are not doing the work, are we? All the work's done by our mum, pushing us out. We are being born. Your mum is doing the action, you are receiving the action. So that is a very common passive phrase that we use. Now for my colloquium friends in this group, there's a sticker for you. Let's move on. Passive voice sentence structure. So we can split this up into 4 main parts. The object, then the auxiliary verb to be, the main verb in past participle, and our subject or agent. Now in past simple and past present, we just have the one auxiliary verb to be. But in continuous and perfect sentences, we have an extra auxiliary. Remember, continuous is be and perfect is has. When creating passive questions, those auxiliaries would go before the object. In past and present simple sentences, your auxiliary to be would go up in front of the object. In your continuous and perfect sentences, the continuous and perfect auxiliaries would go above the object, and your auxiliary verb to be would stay with the main verb. Now part 4 is in brackets because sometimes we do not need to use the agent. For example, an active sentence, they finished building the stadium in 2019. The subject in that sentence is very vague. In passive voice, you would say, the stadium was finished by them in 2019. As the them gives us no solid information, we can exclude it from the sentence. The stadium was finished in 2019. Here we're going to have a look at moving active sentences into passive sentences in a variety of tenses. So, number 1, active voice, Bob flew the aeroplane. So we have the aeroplane to start with. We need a verb to be and our main verb in past participle. We can see from the main verb in the active sentence that we're talking in past tense. So the aeroplane, verb to be in past, the aeroplane was flown by Bob. And of course, the tense for that one is past simple. Number 2, Bob is flying the aeroplane. The aeroplane, now we're going to use an ing. The aeroplane is being flown by Bob. And that is a present continuous sentence. Number 3, Bob will fly the aeroplane. We're talking in the future, so our auxiliary is will. The aeroplane will, then our verb to be. We don't need to change it. And our main verb in past participle. The aeroplane will be flown by Bob. And that is in future simple. And number 4, Bob has flown the aeroplane. The aeroplane has, be in past participle, been, fly in past participle, flown by Bob. And that is in present perfect. Number 5, Bob was flying the aeroplane. The aeroplane was being flown by Bob. And that is past continuous. 6, Bob will be flying the aeroplane. The aeroplane will be being flown by Bob. Getting a little complicated. And that is a future continuous sentence. Bob had been flying the aeroplane. These in the passive are very rare, but they do occur. So the aeroplane had been being flown by Bob. And that is a past perfect continuous passive sentence. As I say, not very common, but they do occur. 8, nice and easy. Bob flies the aeroplane. The aeroplane is flown by Bob. And as we all know, that's present simple. Number 9, Bob has been flying the aeroplane. The aeroplane has been being flown by Bob. Present perfect continuous, again, doesn't happen often, but can occur, a present perfect continuous passive sentence. Number 10, Bob will have been flying the aeroplane. The aeroplane will have been being flown by Bob. And that is future perfect continuous. Number 11, Bob had flown the aeroplane. The aeroplane had been flown by Bob, which is past perfect. And finally, Bob will have flown the aeroplane. The aeroplane will have been flown by Bob, which is future perfect. Okay, so this is a useful table to refer to if you want to change your sentences between active and passive, or vice versa. Preparation for activity 16.3. Here we have a lovely picture painted by Paul Cézanne. Les Jeux de cartes is my attempt at French. Apologies if it's not quite correct. Any of you French learners or French knowers that are listening. The card players. Here are a few sentences about the card players and Paul Cézanne. The Card Players is a series of paintings painted by Paul Cézanne. They were painted during the 1890s. One of the paintings of this series is displayed in Musée d'Orsay, Paris. Again, apologies for pronunciation. Paul Cézanne was born in Aix-en-Provence, France, 1839. Once again, I'm sorry, so sorry about the French. Paul Cézanne was able to draw from a young age thanks to Joseph Gibbert. Paul Cézanne had been persuaded to study law at university. Paul Cézanne was diagnosed with diabetes in 1890. Now, boys and girls, which one of those bullet points is the odd one out? Can you see? I'll give you a clue. They are all in passive voice apart from one. Which one is it? It is the fifth bullet point. Paul Cézanne was able to draw from a young age. In that sentence, he is doing the action. I put was able to. You may remember it from our modal verbs classes with can and be able to. I put it in there because there's a verb to be. I tried to confuse you, and maybe it worked. But anyway, if we wanted to change that active sentence into a passive sentence, we could say Paul Cézanne was taught to draw at a young age by Joseph Gibbert. So that leads us nicely onto activity 16.3. Let's have a look at the worksheet which you will need to complete. Here's our worksheet, activity 16.3, the passive voice practice. Now, in here, you will need to write 3 paragraphs, one about your favorite book, one about your favorite film or movie, and one about your favorite piece of artwork. In each paragraph, you will need to include 3 passive sentences. But in each paragraph, the passive sentences will need to be in different tenses. So, for example, in the paragraph about your favorite book, you could use the past simple passive, past continuous passive, and maybe the present perfect passive. It's up to you, but they need to be different for you to receive 2 points for each passive sentence. You will need to do the same for your favorite film or movie, whichever you'd like to call it, and your favorite piece of artwork. You'll be evaluated using our regular writing rubric, which is out of 12, plus you will receive an extra 2 points for each correctly used passive voice if they are in different tenses. So your final qualification will be out of 30. I gave a few examples for my favourite painting by Paul Cézanne, The Card Players, which gave you examples of passive sentences to talk about a piece of artwork. Obviously, if you do not yet have a favourite book, movie, or piece of artwork, go and do some investigation. And that is all for today. And I will see you next Monday. So take care, guys, and we will speak soon.